Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our talk. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Alex Ramadan, postdoc in condensed matter physics, MPLS ED&I fellow, member of the Race Equality Task Force, and also one half of Challenges and Changes in Physics, and we're hosting the talk today. Starting with some housekeeping. So first things first, we have closed captions available. If you require them, please just click the button at the bottom of your screen that has CC on it, and you should be able to see them. I will warn you, they're not perfect, but they're good enough. There's two ways you can contact us during the talk. Firstly, if you're having any technical issues, you can post something in the chat and our technical team can help you. Also, we're going to have a Q&A session. So if you would like to talk to our lovely speaker and ask her some questions, post your question in the Q&A and I will ask it in the session. You can also upvote questions in the Q&A. So if there's something someone's asked that you're really interested in, feel free to upvote it and I can see what people would most like me to ask. Now, I'm super excited to welcome our speaker, Paulette Williams, to Oxford Physics, and I will introduce her properly soon. So our talk today is about mentorship, and specifically for students from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. And there's a reason we are focusing on these particular students, and that is because students, staff, and academics from these backgrounds are hugely underrepresented here at Oxford Physics, and more widely across the general field of physics. And mentorship is one of the ways that we here at Oxford can try and address this imbalance. Lots of us interact with students and potential students, whether that's through teaching, supervising, outreach, collaboration. And in all of these instances, we can be mentoring these students and helping them to become the next generation of physicists. So I want to give you a bit of background to the topic at Oxford, the statistics and where we're at currently, but just briefly, I want to mention the language we're going to be using today. So when talking about race and ethnicity, language is so important. And when we discuss race at the university, we often use terms like BME, which means Black and minority ethnic, and BAME, which is Black, Asian, minority ethnic, to refer to people who don't identify as white. Now, these are super broad terms, and they don't reflect the widely different heritages and experiences of people who identify within these groups. But I'm going to use these terms today because that's how lots of the statistics associated with admissions and awarding are collected within the university and more widely across higher education. And if you're interested in language, the Race Equality Task Force actually put together an article about it, and it's on the website, and it's really interesting. So go check it out. So full disclosure, the statistics I'm sharing today are somewhat incomplete. The data that I have refers specifically to UK-based students and students who have disclosed their identity, their ethnicity, because lots of them choose not to. UK students make up 79.8% of the total student body across the entire University of Oxford. So I think it's a reasonable estimate of the situation. So across the wider university and of the students admitted in 2020, 23.6% of them identified themselves as Black or minority ethnic. And of this, 3.7% identify as Black. Over the past year, in the Race Equality Task Force, we've been examining the data and talking with students about their experiences here at Oxford. And there's two things I want to highlight, and I'm sure Paulette will touch on these things. So the first is we have a persistent degree awarding gap here between students who are racialized as white and students of color. So what this means is that at undergraduate level, the proportion of Black minority ethnic students here who are awarded a first is 7% lower than white students. And at postgraduate level, this is even worse, and the number rises to around about 12%. Additionally, one of the things I think it's important to mention is the environment. And students, when we spoke to them, reported experiencing racism, microaggressions, and a lack of feeling like they belong here. And this is something that we can all work to change. So on to specifically Oxford Physics. So over the period of 2018 to 2020, we admitted approximately 620 students to the department. Within this, 18.5% of them, the UK students, identified as BAME, 9.5% identified as Asian, and the statistic that I find incredibly disappointing and sad is that only 0.9% identified as Black. And of the UK students, that means we have 3 Black students across 3 years. We've got to do better. I don't have the stats for postgraduate students. I'd love to see them if they're available, but I understand if that's not possible. There are lots of factors that contribute to these statistics, and I want to just briefly mention 2 of them, which I think will tie in really nicely with what Paulette's going to talk about today, and places we can contribute and make significant steps to improve the stats. So the first is A-level physics. Who's taking it? I spent hours trying to find this data, and I couldn't find anything past 2017. This is an area that our incredible access and outreach team is working hard to ensure we reach and encourage as many young people from underrepresented backgrounds to study physics and specifically study it here at Oxford. Here, the access and outreach team are developing targeted mentoring for Black students. And I know that we are starting the Leveling Up Physics Mentoring Program, which is going to help us to broaden the students we're reaching. And if you can, I really encourage you to get involved in these schemes. It's a really great way to help students. Secondly, it's the environment that we have here at Oxford Physics. And this is something that we can all do our part to improve the environment for the students that are here. So that was a very whistle-stop tour through the diversity of our student body and very briefly the issues they face. The question I want to pose to everyone here is, how can we tackle this and help to encourage and develop the next generation of physicists? And Paulette is obviously going to talk to us all about the things that we can do. And I really hope that we can take this information and make a change with it. So finally, I'm beyond excited to introduce our speaker today, Paulette Williams. So Paulette is the founder and managing director of the incredible educational initiative, Leading Roots. The work of Leading Roots is focused on strengthening the academic pipeline for Black students from a Black-led perspective. In addition to her work with Leading Roots, Paulette is head of student success projects at UCL, and she has worked on widening access and participation in higher education for over a decade. I literally cannot think of a better person we could have here to explain to us how we can all be great mentors. So welcome, Paulette. So excited to have you here. Really excited to hear what you have to tell us. And please, everyone, put your questions in the chat for Paulette. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. A great introduction, much appreciated. Good afternoon, everyone. I am actually really excited to be here as well. I think, yeah, the nice thing about this session that we're going to do, it is quite informal, but it's kind of more about like what you can do. So often when we talk about race and addressing racism, there are these really high level kind of initiatives that take place and are organized by the institutions. But I hope today you can take away some really practical things that you can do. So yeah, let me share my screen and my presentation. Yeah, okay, so this happened to me before where I couldn't go back in my presentation, so I'll just start here. Okay, we're good. So yeah, as Alex said, I'm the founder of Leading Roots, started in 2016, and we had our first event in 2017. And the event that we had in 2017 was a parents event. And the aim there really was to engage parents the same way that we have engaged students in widening participation. So I've worked in WP for about 15 plus years. And yeah, we give the students this information, but we don't always have the opportunities to give parents the same information so that they can have conversations. I found that a lot of my colleagues would kind of describe the Black community as hard to reach. And so, yeah, a lot of Black parents wouldn't attend the events. But at that first event, we had almost 150 people attending. And so that was sort of like the start for me, where I realized actually, well, I always knew we were not hard to reach, but that Leading Roots could provide something very special from a Black-led perspective and engage the Black community in a different way. So today's session, Alex has asked me to kind of cover these 3 points broadly. So looking at the education pipeline for Black students, some of the challenges that some of our students experience, how you go about creating a supportive environment for students, what that really involves, and then thinking about mentoring and sponsoring and the difference between the two and what skills are required, or, you know, some of the practical things that we can do to be great mentors, really. We're not going to have questions throughout, but at the end, there will be a lot of time for questions. So please save them up or put them in the Q&A or chat when they come up. So yeah, I've told you a little bit about how Leading Roots started, but now we've kind of been able to really think about what happens to our students throughout the pipeline and introduce some initiatives to address that. So we've got our Future Scholars Programme, which actually starts this Saturday, and that's for year 13 students who are planning to go to university and need some support. We offer that all the way through to the first term of university. So it's kind of like a transition programme as well, which is really, really important in terms of that first term and student retention numbers. We also have the Black in Academia campaign, which is really highlighting representation in academia at postgraduate level, from postgraduate talk and research all the way up to academic careers. And we run events that provide information to potential PGR students. And yeah, do a lot of as well. We've got an initiative called the Career Series, which provides information about what students can do once they've got their PhD. And for a lot of Black students now, that doesn't necessarily involve staying in academia, unfortunately. But yeah, we provide that information. So I thought I'd start off with some stats which kind of give you an idea about the student experience. So when we think about widening participation and that initiative that was started by Labour all those years ago, their aim was to get 50% of underrepresented groups into university. This was successful. We had a huge increase of Black and Asian students. But we know and we saw that the majority of those students went to post-92 institutions. There's nothing wrong with post-92. I went to Middlesex and had a decent experience, a good degree. But we know that the outcomes for students that go to Russell Group universities are a lot better. So the first stat really is kind of thinking about what are the things that are creating barriers for students entering Russell Group University specifically, and a reminder that sometimes statistics can distort the real picture of a situation. So we've also got the awarding gap that Alex mentioned, and that's what I work on at UCL. And across the sector, it is a huge issue that's being addressed. And the gap between Black and white students at undergraduate level is 22%, which is the largest gap between any two ethnic groups. Now, if a student manages to kind of get through that kind of, you know, getting into university, getting a good degree, and then they think about doing a PhD, if they want to get funded, the chances are very slim, particularly from UKRI or Research Council. So we know that out of almost 20,000 studentships, we published a broken pipeline report, which showed that only 1.2% of students secure funding for their PhD. And out of that, only 30 are Black Caribbean students. So yeah, it's thinking about, again, like the statistic that Alex gave, it's like, why are these numbers so small, and what is happening for the students once they're at university? What are these barriers? And finally, I think this number has gone up to 40, so I have to update my slide, but it's still terrible, right? There are 40 Black female professors in the UK at the moment. And this number has gone up quite a lot. Just a few years ago, it was just 17. So we're making progress, but if you look at it from, you know, out of the 21,000 professors that we have in the UK, we still have a long, long way to go. And the idea that, you know, someone that goes through all of this and has their PhD and wants a career in academia says, I don't really want to be a professor, it's okay, is unlikely, right? These are people that have aspirations, want to progress in our careers, and clearly are not getting those opportunities. Now, I had this slide and I've presented it a few times, and I presented it to a friend, and he was like, Paulette, you can't just present this. And I was like, why not? He was like, no, this, anyone could say this is about the students and not about what's happening systemically. So I added another slide. And this is just to give a little bit more background and some research to kind of talk through that experience. So one of the things that we say in academia or in the work that I do is maybe the students aren't really engaging, right? Maybe they're not putting in as much as the other students, and that's kind of what's happening here. But actually, Advanced HE carried out a survey, and they found that Black students are the most likely to engage at university. This is not just with their studies, this is the Students' Union. So thinking about belonging, when we're like, well, maybe if they engage with the union more, they'd belong more. No, right? We're engaging, but still the outcomes are disproportionately low. There's the A-level gap, which widened during the change in assessments during COVID and lockdown, right? So this gap has widened by 1.5%, and it seems like a small number, but it's taken a decade to close it by that same amount. So you can see how, and we'll talk a little bit about COVID and the impact of the pandemic on Black and Asian students, but you can see how situations affect different students in different ways. And we were all concerned about the teacher assessed system because of teacher bias, all the research that's available about teacher bias towards Black students. And sure enough, this is what's happened. Fastest growing rate of exclusions are amongst Black girls. And why this is so troubling is because there's a lot of research about the adultification of Black girls and how Black girls are seen as more mature and adult-like than white girls. And what this means is that there's a greater expectation for them to act maturely, not act like normal teenagers, right? And because of that, they're disciplined more harshly, and also helped less, which you can imagine how that has an impact on their education. And finally, the gap between UCAS offers, UCAS predicted offers and actual offers was 3%, which again, small numbers, but they mean a great deal. So I hope that kind of gives a little bit of research as well to what I've said. And there's a great deal of research out there around the Black student experience that's really, really important to consider. So these are the overall aims of Leading Roots. You can go on our website and have a look. I'm not going to talk through them, but it's just, I think it's just to clarify what our organisation is about. So we're not kind of like a woe is me organisation. We're not about kind of placing the Black student as sort of like this victim. Actually, we want to celebrate the achievements of Black students and academics and provide a platform, but we know that it's important to acknowledge the environment and the circumstances in which we're doing that. So we want to see long-term change within the sector, but in the meantime, we want Leading Roots to be a place where students can come and feel celebrated and validated, and often that doesn't happen in the academy, unfortunately. So when it comes to working with and supporting students, just as I've said there, it's important, I think, that we consider a few things, particularly around the kind of environment that we have in the academy. And in terms of institutional racism, there's been a long history of us kind of acknowledging that there are differences in outcomes, but then trying to explain why that is. So historically, we've kind of looked at the individual student, and we call that a deficit model approach, where we've said, okay, these outcomes are different, but there must be something wrong with the students, right? So the students, they don't know how to fit in, they don't know how to do things properly, and that's why, you know, they're just not doing very well. What we've been able to do, particularly with the awarding gap work, is to really do a deep dive with the data analysis and really look at, okay, what are all the factors that we typically use to put this down to? So we say it's about class. It's because their parents didn't go to university. It's because they didn't go to a really great school. It's because they're from a bit of a rough area, right? And the data analysis we're doing now is so sophisticated that it's taking into account all of these factors, and we still have this unexplained gap. And the only thing left, I mean, we call it discrimination, but ultimately it is racism. And it's something that we need to address, and universities have now acknowledged this needs to be addressed, right? Which is a great move, in my opinion. And although it brings along some very difficult discussions and conversations, I think they're really, really important. So a student that gets the same grades as their peers, and sometimes the analysis showed that Black students and Asian students are on a trajectory to do better than the average white student, still coming out with lower outcomes. So this move to institutional responsibility is really, really important. But I just want to point out here that there's a difference between race and racism, right? So for me, I'm very proud of being a Black woman. There's loads of things about my race that I love, and it influences everything that I do. And I'm really proud of who I am. But it's the environments that I'm in that make it sometimes unsafe to be who I am, right? And be able to kind of be authentic. And Alex spoke about the environments, and we're going to touch on that in a bit, but that is very different from racism. So, and I point this out because sometimes I hear people almost kind of conflating the two, right? It's kind of like, oh, sorry, like, it's okay. I'm happy being Black. I just don't like racism, right? So it's just really important that we have a clear distinction and provide spaces for people to really be themselves and feel comfortable being their authentic self in all environments. So the last thing on that point I want to touch on is this idea that sometimes, I mean, not everyone goes through life and feels that they've experienced racism. And I think it's important that we don't make that assumption. I would argue that they have, but that's not for me to put onto someone else. So there are some extremely successful Black and Asian people, and I think they should be celebrated, and it's really, really important. But it's also important not to individualize those successes and as a representation for what everyone else should be doing, right? I think about myself. I wouldn't necessarily call myself successful, but I would say I'm doing all right. I grew up in Tottenham with a single parent family, went to a really terrible school, not gonna lie. But, you know, working at UCL, I'm doing all right. I feel comfortable. But I would never look at my successes and think, well, if I can do it, everyone can do it. There are so many Black and Asian people that are working really hard that do not have haven't had the same breaks as I've had. So I wouldn't say, you know, oh, I'm just lucky, but I am very lucky, right? And so when we look at different people's outcomes, yes, there is an element of it of, you know, working hard and all the rest of it, which is very, very important. But we can't take away from the other people that are working hard and still haven't had those breaks. So I just want to touch on briefly sort of power and just the kind of framing of when we're doing race equity work. Now, I think at the moment, I think it's a touchy subject to talk about white privilege in particular, but I would argue that we all have some form of privilege, no matter how we look at it. And the important thing is what we do with that privilege. So for me, as I said, I've managed to kind of, doors have been open for me, and I've managed to be in certain circles, gain certain capital. And what I've chosen to do with that privilege is to start leading roots and help other people. I'm not saying we should all start a non-profit. In fact, I'd encourage you not to. But the point is, we can all do something with the privilege that we have, right? And it's that sense of entitlement, I think, that is the problem. So yes, power is important, and privilege, we need to check our privilege constantly. But once you do, it's about what you do with that privilege that is so, so, so important. Power dynamics play an important role in a mentoring relationship. And I think, again, sometimes we forget that, or sometimes maybe we don't forget it and we kind of like it. I've been in situations myself and thinking about academia, which is very much built on these hierarchies. And I think we kind of really respect hierarchy in academia. I think it's remembering how those play out and our role in those as well. And I put a piece in here about language because I think it's important to consider the power that language has. So Alex spoke about BME and BAME. I could think of Black. I would class myself as Black, but think about the 70s with political Blackness that included Asian people, thinking about ourselves as ethnic minorities, but then switching that around and considering that we're a global majority. So all of these things is kind of like thinking about the language that we use and the role that that plays as well in our relationships with each other, is, yeah, important to consider. If we had longer, I'd do a little exercise on that, but we don't. So I'll just plant the seed and hopefully maybe you'll have discussions about that later. So I think one of the things that is always kind of fills us with a bit of anxiety when we're mentoring is, what if my mentee doesn't have the same experiences as me? You know, what if we're really, really different? And I've been in situations where, you know, I've worked with young women very similar to myself, but then I've worked with people who I didn't really think I had much in common with. But ultimately, and I've been mentored by people who are very different from me. And I think it's important to remember that our experiences can be similar or different, and it doesn't really matter. The whole thing is about connecting. And I say this not from a very like EDI perspective, but from just like connect as human beings. I don't think there's any harm in just kind of asking people about, you know, what they're interested in, what they want to do, listening to those answers, and just not making any assumptions about the young people that you're working with, or the students, sorry, that you're working with. So yeah, I will talk a bit about that again in a minute, but I think my main advice is like, don't overcomplicate that aspect of things, because I know when I was mentored by an older white man who worked in the city, I wanted to learn from him. I wanted to hear what he had to say. I was interested in him, you know, and I think once we show an interest in other people outside of ourselves, that's received in a positive way for the most part. And I think that's the important part. All right, put my EDI hat back on now. All right, so building your mentoring relationship. I always get asked about the first session, and I always think, yeah, the first session, there's a lot of anxiety about it. And I would say your first session is likely to be quite awkward, right? Just being honest. But you can alleviate that awkwardness by kind of, yeah, just creating a space where you're yourself, you're interested in someone else, and thinking about what you might like to receive to receive from a mentor in that first session. We're not all that different. Most people want the same thing. So I wouldn't build up too much anxiety. You could introduce an icebreaker if you wanted to. Can again be a bit awkward, but sometimes there's fun in the awkwardness. So yeah, I just wanted to drop that in there because that's the question that I get probably the most around mentoring. And I just want to say, don't build up too much anxiety about it, basically. It's going to be awkward, and just lean into it. So inclusive practices. How do we create inclusive environments? One of the things that I've really been thinking about recently when I've been asked this question is like, how do we create space for people? Now, I know there have been times when I've been in situations where I haven't necessarily felt safe to express myself in the moment. And that could be for a multitude of reasons, but I think it's always nice when you don't have that, you're not able to do that, that a space is created for you to potentially do it later. So for example, it could be as simple as you have a group mentoring session and you're kind of deciding on dates and times, right? And it's almost like maybe there's a person who feels like there's only so many times they can say they can't do a particular day, or, you know, how about this day? And this person's thinking, oh, I got work on that day. Or how about this day? I was like, well, you know, I've got some other caring responsibilities. And, you know, I think it's always nice wherever you can to create something offline and out of the moment where someone can come to you and say, actually, I can't do a particular day, or these are the days I can do. So that's just one example around creating space. But I think one of the more important things is, how do we create safe spaces? And I don't know, I think there's a thing that went around where we shouldn't say safe spaces anymore. But honestly, it's the best description of how I feel often when I'm in the university. Like, is it safe for me to be myself, right? So I would think about things that come naturally to us, and it's always difficult to dissect things that come really naturally. So when I think about academia, we have an environment where we celebrate each other. And how do we celebrate each other? Well, we cite each other. We provide platforms for each other to talk about our ideas and our perspectives. And often those opportunities aren't given to Black and ethnic minority or Black and Asian peers, right? And we don't really think about it twice, but there's a whole campaign called Cite Black Women, because Black women have historically not been cited, their work's been plagiarized. So these are very, very real issues, but they're things that you just think, oh, well, it's not that big a deal, right? I just, you know, I'm not doing it on purpose. But if there's someone that feels like they're being excluded because of that behavior, then it's really important for us to reflect on that. Who is valued? Whose ideas are valued? Whose perspectives are valued? Again, maybe not something we think about immediately, but it's important for us to consider that within our environment. Do people feel safe? Do people feel heard? And I run sessions as well where people are kind of like, right, we need to recruit more Black people. Paulette, how do we do it? And I'm like, okay, I can give you these 5 tips, but also, would you not want an environment where people wanted to come? And this takes a lot more than those 5 tips that kind of get them in the door, right? Because once they're in the door, you want them to be happy. So a bigger piece of work, I think, is around, you know, really reflecting, and it's a bit introspective, but that's the long-term work. And that's the work that I think will see a bigger impact in the sector. But in your mentoring environment, I think there are ways that you can think about doing that. And whilst it's really hard to accommodate everyone, definitely in the mentoring environment, I do think it's important to preserve your own boundaries. So I've been in situations sometimes where I'm like, oh, this is just tugging at my heart. Like, you know, I really want to get involved and I just have to stop myself. Because ultimately we have to rely on the systems that are existing in the institution, unfortunately, because sometimes they're extremely flawed. But yeah, I just think it's important that when we're thinking about inclusion, we take a step back and just really ask ourselves some important questions about our environment, what has created the environment we have now, and how we can make those changes so that everyone feels valued. So one of the things I wanted to touch on was the pandemic. And, you know, at the time, I think people were speaking about it being the great equalizer. You know, had Boris Johnson and the health secretary, like, well, we got it too. So, you know, and as we all know now, this was not the case. But particularly for students, there was an increase in caring responsibilities. There were financial pressures at home. Some people had to move home with overcrowded spaces. And this created a lot of studying challenges to study. I've been in meetings at UCL where people have said, oh, I can't believe students they're just not using, you know, the extenuating circumstances. And it's just really frustrating, because why would you not? And it's like, well, actually, culturally, a lot of Black and Asian people, I can speak for the Black community, where we're told, you know, don't chat your business, don't take your business outside of the house. Or when we're looking after our elders, it's kind of, you wouldn't see it as a responsibility in that same way, in which case you wouldn't see it as a problem that you would put on a form for extenuating circumstances, right? And I'm not saying any other culture does see it like that, but I think it's important that we think about some of the connotations around, you know, culture, and when we're making comments about, you know, well, why wouldn't someone just do that? Well, how about you ask? Ask and get to understand someone else's experiences. So we created at UCL a resource about supporting students from BAME backgrounds during challenging times. It's on the website, it's free to share. And I'm sure you've got similar things at Oxford, but I just think it's important that we just have a think about how the pandemic, yeah, definitely affected people in different ways. So yeah, I think I've got 2 minutes left, so I will whiz through this. And just to say that, well, I'm just really nosy personally, and I like hearing about lots of different people's experiences. And I would encourage you to be a bit nosy. Definitely go on YouTube. There are a lot of YouTube vloggers now that are young people talking about their experiences at university. I'm sure you can find students of all ages. But all backgrounds as well. The other day I watched a young woman, I think she was from, I want to say Yorkshire, but I know definitely it was somewhere north. And she was talking about her experience at Oxford actually, and how her accent was received. And, you know, sometimes, you know, we can talk about the statistics, which are really, really important, but when we hear about people's experiences, it kind of changes the dynamics and changes our perspective, and to put a human voice to those stats are really, really important, and gives us ideas as well on how we can kind of interact with people. And I love student-led things because, you know, they're not as kind of well produced, and they're just a bit more real and raw. Manage your expectations as well as you go into mentoring. So definitely, obviously, don't make assumptions about your mentee and what they do and don't know, but also don't make assumptions about what they have and haven't experienced, and take time to kind of think about it. I'm thinking of an experience I had. I ran a summer project in Tottenham, where I'm from, and I took the students into central London, right? So we got on the train to Euston and we were going to see UCL and SOAS. And I get out of the station and I turn around and there's just no students behind me. And I'm thinking, where are they? And I go back in the station and the students are there looking at, you know, like the timetable, the big TV screen with the adverts, all the shot. And it made me stop and think, right, I take this route every single day. I don't look around. I'm just pacing to work. But actually, when you take a step back and think about some of the experiences that we take for granted, they can be a bit overwhelming. They're very new. They're a bit daunting. And you should just give people a minute, right, just to take these things in. So, yeah, that is just really a point around, yeah, thinking about other people's experiences and comfortability is really, really important. On that note, making people feel comfortable. I've had people who was like, all right, come and meet me in some really dark alley, like hallway in your office, where it's really difficult to get to and you've got this long list of directions. Just go and meet people downstairs. And there's this whole thing, I think, in academia of like, well, I had to do it, so other people should have to go through the same thing as me. And sometimes I think academia should be like, I had to do it, but maybe I can make it a bit easier for the next person, you know? And hopefully we'll get to that stage at some point. So I'll close by saying, please have fun. If it's a mentoring relationship, an official mentoring program, but personal tutoring, I mean, it's great. Or again, I'm nosy, but it's great to get to know other people and find out a bit about them. And, you know there are some anxieties, but be yourself. People are interested in you as well. And there's an opportunity to learn from each other. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the mentoring program if that's what you're doing. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention actually was the difference between mentoring and sponsoring, which I said I would in the beginning. If you can create opportunities for your mentee or whoever it is that you're working with. Mentoring, we sit down, we have a discussion. I talk about my goals and you give me some advice on what to go away and do. And you come back next week at the next session and you ask me if I've done it. But with sponsorship, when you go away and during the week, you might see things that I'm interested in, or if there's opportunities, for example, does anyone know anyone that's interested in doing a piece of work or a little bit of research, and you think of me and you come to me next week and say, Paulette, there's this thing that you might want to apply for. There's a huge difference between those experiences for your mentee. So yeah, have fun, but then also find these opportunities if they're available to really encourage your students and give them an opportunity to develop, basically. So I think I'll stop there. It was a whistle stop tour. But yeah, if there are any questions or anyone wants to have a chat about things, then yeah, happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Paulette. That was really great. You also answered lots of the questions I had, so thank you.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to start to give people some more time to put questions in the Q&A. You mentioned it briefly, but I think there's a bit of definitely like a barrier for a lot of people in the department, in that lots of the people in physics, I think, would love to get involved with mentoring, but they really feel nervous about not being from a similar background or like having had similar experiences. And you touched on it really briefly about, asking and listening to people, but do you have any other advice that you would give people for how to connect with students?
Yeah, I genuinely do believe that we overcomplicate it, because if you are kind of in that situation where you're someone's coming to you or in a space where you're mentoring, they are there to learn from you, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be that we're from exactly the same background and we understand each other. Actually, I want to learn something that I don't know. So the fact that you are from a different background or have different experiences is of value to me. And I don't think that, students aren't stupid, like they understand that we're different, right? So I wouldn't think about it too much. I think that there's plenty of room for us both to learn from each other. So yeah, I don't know if that's reassuring, but just trust me. Just trust me.
Thank you. We're getting lots of messages just saying thank you for your talk as well, because
Well, thank you.
Not just at the moment in the department, there's a postdoc mentoring scheme starting up. So all of your advice, I know you've predominantly spoken for students, but I think everything you said was just so relevant for like all stages of a mentoring relationship. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And can I just say as well, like, think about opportunities outside of these formal kind of structures. So you've got a mentoring program, that's great. And if there's personal tutoring, these are all very formal structures. But I've been in situations I can think of at UCL personally, where there's been a natural opportunity for someone to provide an opportunity for me, sponsorship opportunity. So for example, going to a really senior meeting and they've kind of been like, yeah, we think we really need to take someone senior in with us, and like bypassed me. So, invite me into the meeting, like let me into a space that I'm not really familiar with. And that's an opportunity that you can provide quite naturally. So I wouldn't always think that you have to think, well, I've got to apply for this mentoring program, then I've got to do the training, and I've got to do, if you don't have time. But there might be natural ways that you can do that, and yeah, help and support your colleagues and students.
That's a really great point. I think we need to remind lots of people of that it's not as much work as it seems sometimes. We've got a whole bunch of questions.
Okay, cool.
So, okay, I'm going to just choose. So someone's asked, and I think this is a question you might be able to answer. As a student who is BAME, how do you explain about how different your situation is when people don't see it or don't seem to relate? Sometimes this person feels like they live in a parallel reality.
Yeah. That's a really difficult one. I think the important thing, and I'm being completely honest with you, is it's so important for you to find a support network. So this is a student, Alex.
Yeah.
find a support network. And that could be services and things within the university. It can be like the clubs and societies and things like that, but also your family and your friends at home. Like, however you build up that network, make sure that you have that, because when times get tough, and sometimes they are tough, and it has a toll on your mental health as well, it's so important that you can lean on that network, right? I can't necessarily give you any tips on how to navigate all of this, because I watched a TED talk the other day that said something like, don't be your authentic self, right? And I related with it, because I was like, I would love to be able to bring my authentic self to work, but actually it's often not safe to do that. So I want to protect myself, and yeah, and have, you know, spaces where I'm valued and celebrated. And until that happens within the academy and all these workplaces and universities, I think it's important that we protect ourselves a bit from that and have loving environments elsewhere. That's just me being honest.
No, we appreciate the honesty here, I promise you.
Can
Yeah.
I just say one more thing, Alex, just on the point that you made before about what can staff do? A huge part of it is to trust. I think part of what happens with our privilege is that we sometimes can't believe how challenging someone else's situation is, to the point where we begin to not trust them and not trust what they're saying. And I've seen a couple of examples of this recently. It's important that we trust what people are saying about their experiences in order to be able to truly support them. So I want to add that in.
Thank you. We're getting lots of questions now. So there's a question here that you can't answer, but I'm going to just say it because I think it's interesting.
Okay.
So change comes from the top as well as the bottom up. And someone has asked who the most senior person from our department is attending this seminar. I'm just going to leave that out there. We will see. So I will like to say that we're recording the talk to share it with people, because lots of people are teaching, particularly professors. So hopefully we will get lots more people watching this. Sorry, I've lost a question that I really liked. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not very professional. Okay, so someone's asked, so not everyone feels comfortable talking about their experiences and taking responsibility for advocating for a whole group. And they're asking, what is the best way to ask students from underrepresented groups for their input and perspective without being intrusive?
When you say input and perspective, in what situation would you need to have that, right? So if I were mentoring someone, I wouldn't necessarily go into it thinking I need to understand their perspective. The tips that I'm giving are just kind of more generally to get an understanding when you're building a relationship, which should happen naturally, right? But I wouldn't go into it just thinking that I need to know. So was the person thinking that maybe they can follow up more broadly, like getting the thoughts and experiences of Black students more broadly?
I'm not sure. Maybe they can, hopefully they can quickly put it in the
Clarify.
chat.
Yeah.
Maybe while we wait for them to do that, I can just ask another question.
On that note, while you're finding that as well, I would say that there's so much research out there, whether it's from Advanced HE, the Race Equality Charter Mark submissions, just Googling any university website, you're bound to find some survey results from Black and Asian students about their experiences, the challenges they've experienced, and, you know, like all of the issues. And sadly, they don't change much from institution to institution. I have it at UCL through my work where they're like, this sector-wide study is great, but what about at UCL? And then I give them UCL and they're like, what about our faculty? And I give them the faculty and they're like, but what about our department? And it's like, it's the same thing, right? So it's not going to change that much. So if you do find any information about the Black and Asian student experience, you can kind of take it on board to be, this is generally what we go through, and it's pretty much the same.
That's great. I just want to add for anyone at Oxford, so the Race Equality Task Force consultation is currently online. And in that we do have the experiences of our staff, our students, and also the recommendations that we're making. So I really encourage anyone on the chat to read it and to give your feedback, because we really need to hear other people's ideas. Maybe we've missed stuff. Maybe you think certain things are particularly important. So please go check that out. Okay, how do you help anyone who doesn't feel proud or has adopted behaviors to hide their ethnic background or heritage as the consequence of the racism they've experienced? A sad question.
Yeah, it is, but it's a real question. If I'm honest, I feel like that's such a personal journey for that person. And you can provide support, you can provide encouragement, but I think that's very limited because that person will need to go on their own journey of feeling confident and comfortable with their identity. And that's something that you can't give to them. So you can be kind of like a safe space, I guess. I mean, they've confided in you, I'm guessing, I don't know, but maybe they've confided in you so you can continue to be that space for them. But ultimately, that's a very personal journey that they'd have to take, and a really, really challenging one as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry whoever asked that question.
No, get it.
I would like to say that I think we do have safe environments and spaces in this department, and we have lots of people who are there. You just got to find them. So good luck to whoever asked that question. Okay. You've talked about the importance of creating a supportive and inclusive environment. And we know that the environment here is set by everyone, especially the senior staff. And unfortunately, there seems to be quite a lot of pushback from certain people to change. Do you have any advice on how we can call these people in and get them involved?
Yeah, I've seen this challenge as well. Honestly, I think there are generally groups of people. So there are people that are on board. They've got to be at every event. They're here today. Hi. They're on board, right? I think there are people that are curious and they want to learn more. They're a bit unsure. They're ready to learn. There are people that can be changed, and we've seen that at UCL, that were quite skeptical and can be changed through getting involved in the work, but they have to want to get involved, at least attend an event or whatever. And there are people that honestly, I'm not sure will change, because we talk about sometimes in this work about changing hearts and minds. And I do believe ultimately that is what will kind of create the change. But actually, if there's not a certain level and this is from the senior management, of accountability of what happens when people aren't engaging or aren't changing their behaviors, what happens? Like, if nothing happens, then they're not going to change, right? So I think we can bring some people along with us, but I do think that unless at a very senior level there are, and I hate to use the word repercussions because it's not quite the word that I want to use, but if there aren't any in response to not engaging and not changing, then there's only so much that you can really do, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know how we're gonna tackle this. I know this is a thing that we talk about a lot in EDI meetings, so hopefully. Okay, there's some people feeling feisty in the Q&A.
Okay, be kind.
Not at you, just in general in the department.
All right, let's go.
How do you approach problems within your department when those who are on the EDI committees are part of the problem?
Oh, this happened to me before. I was at work, right? And I had braids, and the EDI rep came up to me and was like, "Oh, your hair's so nice," and touched my hair and was like, "They're like little ropes." And I was like, "Don't touch my hair. Like, this is a microaggression." And it's hard because, you know what? I'll be totally honest. I felt so awkward to then go to him and say, what you did was really, really inappropriate. I was just, the whole thing was so awkward because you are the EDI rep, right? But we're all learning. I think this was a few years ago, and I think if it happened now, I would definitely say something, because we're all learning. I'm learning. I was in a meeting the other day and an incident happened, and I was an awful ally to one of my colleagues with a disability. I didn't call something out because in the moment, I wasn't really thinking, right, it all happened so quickly. And I had to email her after and say, "I'm really sorry," you know? So I think, yeah, you're saying challenging the people in EDI when they're the problem. Could it go any higher? Could you speak to someone else? Because in that incidentally, the person had to go higher above EDI to kind of get it addressed. So I think that's all you can do. But as I said, now I would definitely speak to that person and I would say what you did was inappropriate. And then, you know, that's a learning lesson for them, a learning opportunity. So yeah, it's hard though. It's really awkward. I felt really, really awkward at the time.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's fine.
So,
I'm fine.
um, so I've got a good question to finish
Okay.
up on, and I think this is such an important question for all of us that do work in EDI. How do you keep your spirits up? Because it's obviously so easy to become cynical, and especially when change is on such a slow time scale. Like, how do you keep going, and like, what do you do to make yourself keep
Yeah.
going?
I think I've worked on specifically the BAME awarding gap at UCL since like 2018. And there were times, I'll be honest with you guys, like there were times when I was crying, like I was so upset by the statistics about Black students. And I was thinking, you know, about my little cousins and my godchildren at the time. And it's very personal. And I felt like sometimes my colleagues couldn't relate because the work that they were doing, it's not the same, you know. There were people who would stop me on the street and be like, Paulette, what are you doing? You know, and I know it's impacting their mental health, and you don't have that same, so you can't relate, right? What I had to do, and it was a process, I still cared deeply, but I had to stop feeling like I was responsible, because it's so complex. It's an issue that's just so entrenched in the culture of these universities that I was almost taking it on like I was gonna save UCL. Like I was gonna make everything better. And I just had to realize that that's not how it's gonna work. This work will probably, long after I've left, still be going on, right? So whilst I'm here, let me think about some really tangible, fairly small things that I can do. And then I know that I've made a small kind of I've played a small part in things. But I think if you look at the issues as a whole, it's very overwhelming. And I can tell you now, you're not going to fix that. So look at it as the small bit that you can do. And in your personal life, I mean, I've got a daughter now, and like, yeah, that's why I'm always smiling. Like, she's amazing. So just enjoy like your personal life, and your time with your family and friends and stuff is really important as well in terms of self-care.
Thank you. I just want to repeat something you said earlier that I think just really hit home. You said we can all do something with the privilege that we have. And I think that's like the message to everyone left on this call, that we can all do something. So unfortunately, our time has come to an end, but Paulette, it was
It
incredible.
was a
Thank you
pleasure.
so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Thank you
Pleasure.
for everyone who came. I'm sorry if we didn't answer your questions. But, you know, if you really enjoyed it, let our head of department know, and maybe we can have Paulette back again.
Yay, I'd come back.
So thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and see you around the department soon. Bye, everyone.